Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Seth Dellinger, and I'm with the Feldenkrais Guild of North America's communications team, and this is the Sensibility online newsletter. Delighted to be with Paris Kern today. So welcome, Paris.
Hello.
And Paris, I know from I learned how to be a Feldenkrais practitioner with Paris. She is a trainer of Feldenkrais practitioners and has been teaching the method for 30 years now. And we might get into this in our discussion today, which is going to be about functional integration, how Feldenkrais practitioners work with clients on a one-on-one basis as opposed to the groups. But Paris is got a few specialties. She works a lot with horse riders. She works with singers, and she also teaches the sounder sleep system for people who have difficulty getting a good night's sleep. And so that's just an overview of what Paris does. And as I mentioned, the functional integration is when a practitioner works with an individual client, which is different than the group class called awareness through movement. So could you just begin by sort of describing to us what is functional integration? Why would someone come to see you for a functional integration session, and what you might do?
Well, I was thinking about this the past week when you said that you would want to talk about this, Seth. And functional integration and awareness for movement from the nervous system's experience of learning are really the same thing. But when you're doing an awareness for movement class, you're in the driver's seat. You're getting a few tips from the teacher to turn here, go there, explore this. But you're not having to, you're having to be very responsible for driving your car and going where the teacher tells you. But you're also not becoming aware of what is making it more difficult for you to turn down this road or that road. In functional integration, the teacher is the driver, and you are more of the passenger, learning as you go. It's a hard thing to talk about because getting a functional integration lesson, which you usually go to somebody's office, or sometimes they have a studio. We tend to call them studios because we're more involved in learning rather than therapy. You'll be fully clothed, and the practitioner is going to perhaps do a little bit of an interview, maybe short, maybe long, and really find out your personal history from however far back you can remember, including any accidents, illnesses, injuries, traumas, anything that has made you who you are. And they're also going to be curious about how you spend your time. Do you work in an office? Are you a gardener? What is it that you do with your life? And are you satisfied with your life? And they'll also ask you, what do you want? Because most of the time when people go to a teacher for functional integration, they have a specific thing like, oh, my shoulder hurts, or I just can't get down on my knees with my grandchildren anymore, or, you know, somebody told me that after I broke my leg, it'd be a good thing to get functional integration lessons. Can you help me?
Right.
So people usually come for a specific reason, but that specific reason might just be curiosity. You've done, you know, a few classes for a while in awareness for movement. And you know that every time the teacher says, oh, we're going to do a lesson lying on our belly now, you go, oh, I really don't want to lie on my belly. And you might go to a practitioner and say, you know, I have real difficulty with these lessons. Can you help me learn how to lie on my belly comfortably? So it might be something as small as that. Or it might be something as large as you've had a stroke or a brain injury, and your right side doesn't work anymore, and you need an assistant, you need a teacher to help you beyond what the physical therapist will do to really feel how it is you need to learn to use yourself again, rather than being pushed and prodded and manipulated into doing something again. We're looking for a way to get your brain to help you find your way back to a level of normalcy again. So that's a little bit of the why somebody would go to functional integration. The other thing that I think makes it distinct from other one-on-one enhanced therapies is that in the same way you're encouraged to do very small, very gentle movements in awareness for movement, smaller than maybe you can even imagine in the beginning. You'll be amazed when you go to a Feldenkrais practitioner how the slightest little touch of their fingers or their hands on your shoulder or your neck or anywhere can produce such profound changes. Mm-hmm. And one of the simplest things that one feels very often in functional integration is you just feel you relax more. And that's not the point. The point is learning how to do something. But the first point is to get rid of all the extra tensions and things that are standing in the way of your being able to learn something.
Right. Yeah. And I think what I'd like to add for someone who's never been to a functional integration session, but you mentioned how the slightest touch can really, clarify something. And you talked about what we feel as we move. And so awareness through movement, as you explained, we're exploring movement. With a practitioner in a functional integration session, you're also exploring, but there's something about it's kind of hard to name it, but there's something about the quality of touch that the practitioner gives that it's like it's indicating or it's helping you listen to yourself. I just wonder if you could say a little more about that, because there's something about the interaction that's really...
It's an interaction. So there's many ways to talk about it. Moshe Feldenkrais would say it's a dance of two nervous systems. Mm-hmm. And maybe some of you listeners have had an experience of you're a pretty good dancer, but you're not great. And then you're partnered with somebody at a wedding or someplace where you do partner dancing, where you're actually touching each other. And you dance with somebody who's a better dancer than you. And all of a sudden you feel graceful and elegant because the better dancer's nervous system has communicated with your nervous system of another possibility, another way of being. And Feldenkrais practitioners have a very long and sometimes arduous training over a 3 to 4 year period to just begin to learn how to touch in this way. And until we decide that we no longer want to practice as practitioners, and I know very few who ever retire, we're constantly refining our touch, trying to use less and less and less and more elegant ways of communicating a different way of moving. And that leads me to another reason why somebody might want to do functional integration, which is we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what we don't know. So you might be the person in class who's clenching their jaw. And the teacher has said multiple times during the class, stop clenching your jaw. But you're sure you're not the one clenching your jaw. So you can get away with clenching your jaw for the rest of your life if you just don't ever pick up on that. And when you work one-on-one, the teacher's going to zero in on that right away. And you go, well, I didn't know I was the one that he was talking to all the time. So having a guide, like a trail guide in a way, helps you negotiate this way into a more profound understanding of how it is you use yourself and what you're doing that's getting in the way.
Yeah, fantastic. So people can probably hear like a very common reason that someone comes for functional integration is some sort of physical challenge or difficulty. It could be, as you mentioned, also neurological. And at the same time, it sounds like from the interview that you described, we're really looking at the whole picture of the person's life, or at least potentially. Is that right?
Yes. And a lot of people, when they ask me, well, what is Feldenkrais? What is this functional integration stuff? And one of the things I learned from one of my teachers was that we never learn anything new. We always have two pieces of information that when they're combined, we get the new piece of information. That's just the way the brain works. So I just lost my train of thought.
Well, just about kind of the whole person's life, like you mentioned, they may have had trauma or what's important to them. How does this come in?
So what I was about to say was what I say to people that really can't grasp what functional integration is like. I say, well, if you took occupational therapy and psychotherapy and put them together, you'd get something. Because most people do know what psychotherapy is and occupational therapy. So that can give you an inkling, but it's still not a very complete picture, because while a practitioner is working on you, they're remembering that you had a really rough year in 5th grade after you broke your ankle and you felt ostracized. And when something goes on with your left ankle, your breathing is interrupted. When your breathing is interrupted, your chest stiffens, and maybe that has something to do with your neck pain. You know, I don't know of any other profession that will take all these different disparate parts of your life, or seeming disparate parts of your life, that nobody has put 2 and 2 together or 4 and 4 together to figure out what's going on with you. And that's what a practitioner is doing all the time. They're monitoring your skin tone. They're monitoring your breathing. They're monitoring your sense of ease, your sense of relaxation, or your sense of tension. They're listening to if your tummy starts grumbling, to see if the digestive system is working. They're looking if your toes are curling. They're looking at what kind of shoes you wore when you walked in. Do you belt your pants really tightly? You know, are you wearing an underwire bra that's restricting your breathing? There's nothing that isn't important to a Feldenkrais teacher.
Can we take one of those just for fun?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I come to you for a session and you notice that my belt is super tight. What are some of the thoughts you might have? But also, what are some of the things you might sort of propose to me or do with me if I'm
well, in a first lesson, I may not say anything, because the first thing that has to happen is we have to develop a relationship of trust. And if you walk in and I say, oh, you know, loosen that belt, you're going to feel a little uncomfortable, and I'm not going to want to do that. But I might ask, as we start the lesson, I said, would you mind loosening your belt while we're doing the lesson? And you might say, why? And I say, well, let's just see if it makes any difference. Then you can do whatever you want. Because even though I'm the driver in this metaphor, the passenger is the boss. Mm-hmm. Whatever this person needs, this is what I'm going to try to provide. And in order for a person to learn, I have to provide a completely safe environment where they don't feel judged, where they don't feel ignorant, where they feel just fine the way they are. And if a person can leave my studio feeling better about themselves, even if their ankle still hurts, I feel like I've done a good job.
Right. And it sounds like what you're saying here too is like, I mean, if people listening don't imagine this, I mean, right, it's harder to breathe if I have the belt really tight. But just because you see that and observe that, you're wanting to lead me to kind of discover that on my own and make it my own learning, rather than just like, hey, look, I'm a Feldenkrais practitioner, so I'm telling you, you got to loosen your belt.
Right. It's the same thing with high heels. Mm-hmm. You know, somebody, you know, and optimally, I could teach a person how to live with high heels without hurting themselves by having alternatives and doing it in a humane manner. And in the same way that we all have to learn how to crawl on our own, and every single human being has taken their own pathway neurologically to learn how to crawl and walk. Mm-hmm. Nobody does it exactly the same. And Feldenkrais practitioners are just as individualistic in this way. And there's a lot that we have in common, because things like gentleness and pacing and safety, these are parameters that have to be there for learning to happen. But the way I create a sense of safety and the way I create a sense of ease and lightness and pleasure, I use a lot of humor. Other people don't. I'm my own person, and I bring all of what has been my history when I'm working with a person. Right. And there's not a perfect practitioner for each person out there. And you will find that perhaps you get some lessons from this practitioner and you become aware of one aspect of yourself, and you take a lesson from another practitioner, and it's like, oh, you don't click. That doesn't mean that they're not such a great practitioner. It just means for some reason you weren't on the same wavelength. That being said, our goal as individual practitioners is to be as adaptable as possible so we can serve as many different situations as we would like to. I'm going to just move this a little bit, see if I can get out of the sun. There we go. Sorry if anybody got nauseated.
Of sunlight across your face in different patterns. It's great. And what I'm hearing also is that there's a real honoring of the individuality of the client. Like, I know in our training, we talked a lot about kind of optimal human function, ideal movement, the easiest way to, say, stand up from a chair. And there can be sort of guidelines that are likely to work for most people. And yet the client is this particular person. And I'm hearing you say that the practitioner really draws on their individuality as well.
Yeah, because I know what I know, you know what you know, and we've had different life paths, but we both give good lessons. So it's the thing that we also, and I know you remember this from your training, Seth, is people are doing the best they can.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody wants to have shoulder pain. They're not making it happen. I mean, they are making it happen because it's how they're doing things that's making it happen. But it's not because they want the shoulder pain. Right. They just don't know how to get rid of it. It's just a matter of learning. That's really what it's about. It's about learning. And so if you remember that as a practitioner, when somebody comes, it's like, this little girl who hasn't learned how to read is working as hard as she possibly can. What can I help her do that will make it a little bit easier for her to figure things out in life?
So you're just reminding me, and I didn't mention this in the beginning, but another one of the specialties that you do is that you work with children. Mm-hmm. We actually did a edition of Sensibility about the work with children recently, but I'm kind of curious to talk a little bit about some more specific situations, and maybe we could go back to some of the things that you're very familiar with. So horse riders, for example, obviously are going to come to you with different questions than people who don't ride horses, but this is something that is part of your personal experience. You're an equestrian and you've worked with a lot of clients. And so someone might come to you with a very specific question around horse riding. Just to give an example of a more specific case of functional integration, what that might be like.
So a little bit of history of this. I sort of fell into working with equestrians. I don't ride anymore. I did all the time as a young adult and as a child. But then life happened and horses are not part of my life. So I was very happy when an equestrian came to me with back pain. And it led me to doing clinics with riders. And when I first started doing clinics with riders, I had assumed that riders would have a very good sense of their hip joints and pelvises. And I was shocked to find out that it wasn't better than other people, but it was actually worse than the average, because of a lot of the techniques that they had employed to do so. So say, for instance, a rider would come to me, and I usually tend to work with dressage riders who have to have very exacting balletic movements with their animal. So she could do a wonderful circle to the left, and every time she tried to do a perfect circle to the right with her horse, it just wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work. And it was really a very simple cure for this person because she bent really well in this one direction. So when she would ask the horse to bend in this same way, the horse would say, the horse is getting a functional integration lesson from the rider in a sense. They're listening to the rider's nervous system tell them or ask them to do a certain thing. So the horse will go to the left. Well, then I looked at this person and she's always sitting like this in a chair, typing, eating her dinner, right? So she can't bend to the right. So every time she was trying to bend the horse to the right, she's like this. and kicking the horse. And the horse is like, I don't know what you're asking of me. So it was a very simple series of, yes, just 2 or 3 lessons really to help her feel, oh, you can bend this way. But it wasn't just about taking the spine and making her bend this way. It was also understanding that she only looks out of this eye. So we had to do some eye work too. So she would start to look out of this eye. So there are all these different pieces. And then, oh, she has some pain in her left hip. Maybe that's why she doesn't stay there. So you have to look at the whole person to see what it is with this one little problem that they have. Because it wasn't just a problem with the turning, it was a problem like she couldn't even sit straight.
Yeah. So the person who comes to a functional integration with you, lesson with you, it's almost like they're coming to hang out with Sherlock Holmes and do a little investigation.
It is very much like that.
Yeah.
It's very much like being a detective.
Yeah, yeah. How about you? You've also actually done some singing with Bobby McFerrin, and you do the circle singing, which I just want to mention that it's also, if people aren't familiar with it, there's a lot of improvisation in that. So
that is
ways that we can talk about improvisation in the functional integration method. Yeah.
So I apologize to anybody who gets nauseated by my moving the camera, but I live in Vermont, and this is the first really perfect day we've had after a lot of rain. So I just had to be outside.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's very interesting to me that the first time I went to a workshop with Bobby McFerrin, and Google him if you've never done so, that out of this group of people, there were 5 other Feldenkrais practitioners. There's so few of us that the chance of us spontaneously bumping into each other anywhere in the world is really, really low. So I really tried. So circle singing is an improvisatory style of conducting a group of singers. Improvisation is the key, as you mentioned, Seth. And a Feldenkrais practitioner, when they're giving a functional integration lesson, it's completely improvised. We have guidelines. That's how we teach practitioners how to learn how to do something. But then you have to say, well, I need a little bit of this. I need a little bit of that. I have to look at this. I have to look at that. And oh, I remember that my teacher said that when the breathing is like this might also be going on. And you start to pull all these bits to create a lesson for that person for that day. And you never give the same lesson. So even if I'm doing a lesson, I'm teaching somebody how to raise their right arm above the head, I'm going to teach Sally how to get her arm above the head one way, and I'm going to teach Susie and Frank and Ralph, everybody. I have to find what it is that helps them. So I'll use a different technique for each person for the same function, or I'll use a technique to elicit different functions in a person. So maybe it's going to be something about taking the shoulder forward, but maybe I'm taking the shoulder forward to help that rider sit on the opposite hip more easily. Maybe I'm taking that shoulder forward to help the violinist with their bow arm. It could be anything.
And what are some of the questions you might get from, I imagine you've had clients who are singers that you've met through the circle singing and whatnot. What's if someone feels like I can't really, my voice, I can't project, or I just can't
the way I talk
what my singing teacher's trying to tell me, or anything like that?
So with singers and musicians as well, they're very often coming because their teacher has gotten frustrated with them not being able to do something. I can't really, especially with singers, I can't see what's going on in there. I can only hear the results, right? Singing is a very weird, mysterious thing. You can't go in there and just change the strings. Right. It doesn't work like that. But in order to be able to improve anything, including singing or playing the violin, you have to be able to learn. And in order to be able to learn, you have to understand what it is you're actually doing right now, what part of that you want to change. And then I can assist you in saying, this is what's getting in your way of getting to that point. Whether it's every time you reach for a high note, you do this with your eyes and stiffen the back of your neck, and then their belly goes in and then your chest can't move, or whatever it is. And as a singer myself, I know I have to go to another Feldenkrais practitioner because, again, as I said before, I don't know what I don't know. So I can, try this, try this, try this, try this, try this, but it takes somebody else to say, but did you realize that you kept your hand in a fist the whole time? Maybe that's why your body's not resonating with the sound.
Right. So habits are just like, they live in our blind spot, and functional integration can be an opportunity to bring them out into the light, in a sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's coming back to what I said earlier about blind spots. We don't know what we don't know. We can't see that we're not doing something if we don't even look there. We don't even know to look there. Or we look there. Here's a really good example of why functional integration, there's an advantage to it over ATM in certain situations. Eilat Almagor, who is an Israeli trainer, is one of my teachers, and she shared a story about a little boy who became a man. And this was a true story in her experience. And she, before she did her Feldenkrais training, she was working in some situation in a school with a bunch of children. And there was this one boy who was a very nice boy, but he was really rough. And whenever he played with other children, they would get hurt. And the teachers were always telling him, be more gentle, softer, slower. And he was a good kid and was trying to be gentler, but he never did. Then Eilat started her training, and she gave this boy a lesson, a functional integration lesson. And then life went on after there, and then she went her way. And about 10 years later, this young man came up to her at some function they were both at, and he said, I want to thank you, Eilat. You taught me what the word gentle means. This child had never felt gentle. He didn't have an internal experience of what that was. So teachers were telling him to be gentle, and who knows why he wasn't. Maybe he was handled really roughly as an infant, just by, people just picking him up and shaking him and, being rough and tumble with him. And he didn't know gentle. So he was trying, but he just didn't know.
Right. Wow, that's a really powerful story. And it's funny, I had a memory from the training again, which I wanted to bring up, but that story, I think it's a nice frame because so someone who has back pain, or someone who has difficulty in their, getting the horse to turn in one direction. This boy doesn't know gentle. These are all things that, could lead to a functional integration lesson. I remember being in the Feldenkrais training where, sometimes we would spend a whole weekend working with movement. And part of our training is to receive functional integration lessons so that we become more sensitive. And I remember I got to have a lesson with you. And maybe because of what we were doing that weekend, at least my memory is I was already feeling pretty good, but hey, it's an opportunity. And I think I said something to you like, I just want to feel something I never felt before. And I think you probably said something funny about that. But I remember that I also had a really powerful experience. And I just want to bring up that sometimes people, just go for pure learning. Like they're not troubled by something, but they could come. And I just wanted to include that in the mix of functional integration. I have a client who sometimes comes, and has difficulties, but other days she'll say, I feel great today, but we'll still have a really,
profound
interesting
lesson.
Session. Could be sometimes some of this the best. So I wonder if you could talk about that.
Oh, absolutely. So one of the things that I say to people when they come with an issue, whether it's pain or dysfunction or anything, is that my aspiration, I don't want to use the word goal, but my aspiration when I'm working with an individual is not to get them back to where they were before they had the problem or the issue, but it's to get them there and then take off and really help them become the sort of person that's not going to do these silly things that injured their ankle or their shoulder. So you want to become a person who's not just hanging on and sort of is satisfied with the status quo, but why not continue to improve until you're gone? Why not, and it's not as though any of us are going to say that aging doesn't happen, For sure it happens. But there's ways of aging and there's ways of not aging. And I'm sure everybody's got some people in their lives where they see some 50-year-old that is like, oh my God, that person's so old. And then you see somebody like Jane Goodall, who is one of my personal heroes, who's 86, who's still dashing around the world, giving lectures, saving, environments, teaching young people how to save the environment where they live. So age, she probably can't go running through the jungle the way she did when she was 20 years old. But given the restrictions of aging, she is using herself in an exquisite manner. Yeah. So it's really about not just getting rid of problems, but really improving.
So if you come in to see your Feldenkrais practitioner, you're not currently experiencing any obvious pain or difficulty, it's still that question of what do I not know, perhaps.
Yeah, do you know how to do a somersault?
Yeah.
I could teach you how to do a somersault. And I don't have to be a gymnast to be able to do it. Because, for instance, I am completely not a swimmer or a golfer. But I have helped a lot of swimmers and golfers improve their speed and their game. Because I could see this guy sticking his tongue into his cheek every time he pulls the club back to hit the ball. And he wonders why he has all this neck pain. And so I made him play for a while, sticking his tongue out. No more neck pain. And then he just didn't stick his tongue out anymore.
Right. I can see your humor coming through in that last example. That's great. Well, Paris, this has been really wonderful. I just wonder if, to sort of bring this to a close, if there's any final thoughts on functional integration, that you
try it. You'll like it.
Great.
Perfect. And what I say to people is like, what have you got to lose? You're not going to be hurt. I pray, if the person's had good training. It's very gentle. The worst thing that can happen is you're going to be out some money and maybe bored. That's not such a big deal. And I will also say, this is really important. If you have not been doing a lot of awareness for movement already, and you're just listening to this and you just want to jump right into functional integration, that's fine as well. I went to an awareness for movement workshop as my first introduction. And I immediately started getting functional integration lessons. And I didn't want anything but that. I didn't want to do the work, the awareness for movement work. It took me a while. I just wanted somebody to fix me. And no matter how many times my teacher told me, we don't fix people, that's not what we do. I was in so much pain that I just wanted to get fixed. Yeah. And then I started getting curious about the awareness for movement. And the other thing about functional integration and awareness for movement, it's not one-stop shopping. Sometimes things happen really quickly, changes happen really quickly. But most of the time, especially with a neurological illness or a pain syndrome, it's going to take a while for your nervous system to learn how to learn. And when new people come to me, and they say, well, can you help me with this? And I'm like, I don't know if I can help you with this. I can do my best, I can try, but I'm going to ask you to give me 4 or 5 lessons. Commit to coming 4 or 5 times. If you feel nothing after 4 or 5 times, then maybe this is not for you. But not just to take one lesson, because a lot of times that first lesson, you're just like, I don't know what I feel. Did they really do anything?
Different experience than what a lot of people have previously tried. But if they stick with it, there's kind of like we used that Sherlock Holmes metaphor before, there's something that can really unfold and open and even flower.
Right. Very much. Very much.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for taking the time with me, Paris, and for everyone watching. And
yeah, it was a fun conversation. Thank you, Seth.
Yeah, great.
And I just say, try it. You'll like it.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.